Hello everyone, it's 7 o'clock. This is Sky News Breakfast. It's now a week since Nicola Bully disappeared, seemingly without a trace, while walking her dog in Lancashire. This morning we'll bring you her family's emotional appeal that somebody somewhere must know something. And we'll have the latest from St Michael's on Wire, where that search continues. Plus, rail workers on strike again. We'll hear from the head of the group representing the train operators and later Labour's Stephen Kinnock. It's Friday, the 3rd of February. Her children need her. A family's plea for answers as the search for missing mum Nicola Bully reaches its second week.
Somebody must know something. Somebody must know. People don't just vanish into thin air.
I'll have the latest on the police investigation from where Nicola went missing, here in St Michael's on Wire.
More disruption for rail passengers as train drivers strike again.
The Pentagon tracks a spy balloon believed to be Chinese spotted in US airspace. Cancer cases forecast to rise by a third by 2040. Keeping the lights on, the National Grid tells Sky News its new energy-saving scheme could become the norm. In sport, Graham Potter's Chelsea face Fulham tonight after a record-breaking transfer window. In the weather, generally mild and mainly fine in the south, but the north can expect more wind and rain. And the rush to buy tickets as Beyoncé announces her first new tour in nearly 7 years. Hello, very good morning to you. It's now a week since Nicola Bully went missing while walking her dog in the Lancashire village of St Michael's on Wire, and her disappearance remains a mystery. There was some 25 minutes between Nicola's last sighting and her phone and dog being found on a bench. In that time, she vanished. Her family has told Sky News that somebody must know something and say they're living in a nightmare. Nicola's sister Louise and father Ernie were speaking to Sky's Imzaman Rashid.
Somebody must know something. Somebody must know. People don't just vanish into thin air. There's got to be somebody that knows something. And all we are asking, no matter how small or big, if there's anything that you can remember that just doesn't seem right, then please reach out to the police. Please just get in touch and get my sister back.
How much are you missing her?
Oh, don't. It's hard. It's hard. We're such a close-knit family. We are a close-knit family, I'm sorry. We do anything for any one of us, and the children would do the same for us. So, yeah, just hope she comes home.
So this is what we know about Nicola Bully's last movements. She went missing early last Friday morning after driving 10 minutes from her home in Inskip to the nearby village of St Michael's on Wire. She dropped her children off at school before heading down Garstang Road with her dog Willow. There she began her walk around the river at around 8:43 a.m. About 8:50, she was seen in the lower field. It was at around this time that a woman wearing a red coat was also seen, and police asked her to come forward as a potential eyewitness, and she has now been spoken to. Nicola sent an email to her boss at 8:53 a.m. At 9:01, she logged on to a Teams call, and about 9 minutes later, a witness who knows Nicola saw her in the upper field, still with her dog Willow. At 9:30, the Teams call ended, but Nicola stayed logged on. Nicola's mobile phone and Willow were found at a bench by the river by another dog walker at about 9:35. Well, Sky's Fraser Maud is there in St Michael's on Wire for us this morning. So, Fraser, incredibly distressing for the family, waiting for news. But in the meantime, what is the latest on the police investigation?
Good morning. Well, in just a little over 2 hours' time, it will be exactly 1 week since Nicola went missing. The police say that they still don't believe there was a third party involved, that they still don't believe that there was any other involvement in her disappearance, and they are keeping an open mind. Having said that, their investigations will continue. They have Nicola's mobile phone, which was left logged on to a Teams call, which was discovered some 20 minutes or so after the last positive sighting of Nicola, so they will be searching that for any potential forensic evidence. They'll continue their searches along the riverbanks and in the river as well. This is a search that's involved not just Lancashire Police, but the local mountain rescue teams, fire and rescue service, as well as they try and comb the riverbanks, comb the river itself to try and find any trace at all of Nicola. And with it being 1 week on, we humans, well, our work and social lives make us creatures of habit, and so it's likely that people who are in the area in the next couple of hours or so may well have been in this area last Friday as well. So the police, as well as many concerned members of the community here and many of Nicola's family, friends and so on, will be out as well this morning. They'll be giving out leaflets, they'll be talking to people in the area, hoping that they may have seen something last week, a week ago today, that could provide the vital clue to finding Nicola alive. The family say they are living a nightmare at the moment and have been for a week now. It was heartbreaking to see, wasn't it, Nicola's sister and her father putting out that emotional appeal, speaking to our correspondent Inzamam Rashid yesterday. They are desperate for any piece of information, as are the police. They say they continue to keep an open mind. The searches here will continue today, but still, 1 week on, the disappearance of Nicola Bully remains a mystery.
Fraser, thanks very much indeed. Now, large areas of the country will be left without any rail services again today as train drivers and rail workers strike for the second time in a week. Members of ASLEF and the Rail Maritime and Transport Union, or RMT, are walking out in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. Well, Sky's Milena Veselinovic is at London Euston for us this morning. So, Milena, another day of disruption for passengers, but there is an offer on the table for the RMT at the moment, isn't there? So is it possible that a resolution is getting closer?
It's quite hard to say, Anna. They've been negotiating for months, and what we've heard from union leaders so far this time, ASLEF Assistant Secretary General, is that the dispute had gone backwards, if anything. They're saying that the government's offer of 8% over 2 years would have not been enough just on its financial merit, but that it also, they say, comes with strings attached, such as adding significant number of hours to each train driver's schedule, they say. So therefore, unions are saying that is just not acceptable to us, and these strikes will continue. And you can see behind me Euston Station, one of the busiest in London, completely deserted on a Friday morning on rush hour. On the other hand, the train companies are saying, well, the pandemic has left them, they say, in a financial black hole. They don't think the passengers should shoulder that burden. They don't think the taxpayer should either. They say that instead there need to be reforms, and people simply don't use the railways as they used to. Many work from home Mondays and Fridays. So it seems the two sides are such polar opposites. It's really hard to see how they can move on from this impasse.
OK, Milena, thanks very much indeed. Now, the United States is tracking a suspected Chinese surveillance balloon over its airspace. The fighter jets have been scrambled to monitor the balloon, but it won't be shot down due to fears of people being injured on the ground. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has the latest.
Yeah, the US has been watching this surveillance balloon for the past few days before revealing anything publicly. They are now saying that they very strongly believe that it is a Chinese surveillance balloon, and it's over the state of Montana and specifically the city of Billings in the southern part of the state. You can see pictures and videos that people have taken on the ground, quite clearly puzzled about this strange object in the skies above their city. If you look at it, it looks almost like a small version of the moon, and it's presented this conundrum for the Department of Defence and for President Biden about what he does about it. They're saying at the moment they've decided not to shoot down this balloon for two main reasons. Firstly, they're concerned that it could have heavy machinery attached to it, and if they shoot it down, it may result in a large debris field and risk to civilian life on the ground. Secondly, and crucially, at the moment they say They don't believe that China is receiving any strategic benefit from this balloon than they would be getting from ordinary satellite imagery. But it is interesting that they've chosen to situate the balloon over the state of Montana home to one of only 3 US military bases in the United States, which specialises in intercontinental ballistic missiles, although the Department of Defence not saying publicly that that's why they believe that China have flown it there. But certainly interesting timing from the US in publicly disclosing that they believe there's a link to China, because we're just a few days away from a visit that the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, is taking to Beijing, where he's expected to meet with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. And certainly this episode is doing nothing to dilute tensions between the two countries.
Cancer cases will rise by a third over the next 2 decades, taking the number of new diagnoses each year to more than 500,000. That's the warning from Cancer Research UK. And experts say it should prompt a stronger push to stamp out the unhealthy habits that can lead to the disease. Sky's Aisha Zahid reports.
This is my best friend, Amanda.
In her 40s, Lorraine was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a type of blood cancer. She's been living with the illness for nearly a decade. She will live with it for the rest of her life.
It's not curable. It's never curable because it's part of my bone marrow, it's part of my blood, it's just not something removed. And then it's been in the last year or so that the levels have started to go up again, which means that the treatment I was having most recently is no longer effective. Like most people, regardless of what cancer you've got, cancer is so sneaky, shall we say, that it recognises treatments and it can just stop working. So I'm now waiting to try a different type of treatment.
Thousands of people will share similar experiences, and that's only expected to increase. Analysis by Cancer Research UK suggests that by 2040, the number of people diagnosed with cancer will rise by a third. This means cases per year are expected to increase from around 384,000 to more than 500,000, particularly for those over the age of 70. The charity says action needs to be taken now.
Unless we increase workforce and access to diagnostics, screening, and really push early detection within the NHS and ramp out these rapid diagnostic centres and improve our health of the nation through other ways, such as restricting junk food advertising, trying to do our best to cut smoking rates, I think the future is deeply worrying.
In response to this, a government spokesperson said, "We are laser focused on fighting cancer on all fronts, prevention, diagnosis, treatment, research and funding, so we can deliver the best possible outcomes for patients." For Lorraine and so many others, it's essential that this commitment materialises into better treatment and better diagnosis. Aisha Zahid, Sky News.
Let's take a look now at some of the day's other headlines. And the energy regulator Ofgem has asked suppliers to suspend the forced installation of prepayment meters and review their processes for dealing with customers who've fallen into arrears. The request comes after it was revealed that debt collectors working for British Gas had forced their way into the homes of vulnerable customers. Manchester United are to carry out their own internal investigation into their suspended forward Mason Greenwood. The 21-year-old was accused of attempted rape, controlling behaviour and assault, but the charges against him were dropped following the withdrawal of key witnesses. In a statement, Greenwood said he's relieved. Modern warfare is accelerating away from the Ministry of Defence due to a lack of technology upgrades. The Public Accounts Committee says the department has been struggling for years to deliver upgrades and needs to act fast, especially with the war in Ukraine. Apple's reported its first quarterly revenue drop in nearly 4 years, blaming COVID restrictions in China, which hit its factories. Sales during October and December were at £96 billion, down 5% on the year before. Supply chain problems delayed the delivery of iPhones during the crucial holiday period. Tennis star Nick Kyrgios has pleaded guilty in an Australian court to assaulting a former girlfriend during an argument in his hometown of Canberra in January 2021. The Wimbledon runner-up has, however, avoided a criminal conviction, with the judge saying the offence was at the low end of seriousness for a common assault and was not premeditated. EU heads of state will hold a summit later with Ukraine's President Zelensky. Among those expected to attend are Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, and Charles Michel, the President of the European Council. Ukraine has applied for membership of the EU, but accession talks haven't yet started. A report has charted an alarming 80% decline in the UK's butterfly species since the 1970s. Butterfly Conservation, a wildlife charity, says half of those remaining are threatened or near threatened. It also found some southern species are spreading north with the warming climate. Now, it's normally the kind of getaway you'd see in the movies, but this was actually the scene as thieves fled through a shopping centre in Canada. I think we can see the pictures now. There we go, driving a car which has been stolen and used in a raid on an electrical store. The thieves thought they could outwit police by driving actually through the shopping centre, which was fortunately empty at the time. The car was later found dumped, but investigations are continuing into what police are calling a pretty audacious crime. Still to come here on the show, with a warning that yearly cancer diagnoses could pass 500,000 in the coming decades. I'll be speaking to NHS England's Clinical Director for Cancer about the work they're doing to catch early signs of the deadly disease. Labour's Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock will be with me shortly after 8. And with train strikes bringing services to a standstill in large areas of the country, I'll speak to the chair of the Rail Delivery Group about what can be done to prevent further walkouts. Now, Downing Street has said the Prime Minister was not aware of any formal complaints against Dominic Raab when he was appointed as Justice Secretary. This follows a report in the Times newspaper claiming that the Cabinet Secretary was personally informed of a written complaint against Mr Raab months before Rishi Sunak reappointed him. So let's bring in our political correspondent, Rob Powell. Very good morning to you, Rob. And we know that Dominic Raab is being investigated at the moment amid bullying allegations. So lots of questions now about how much the Prime Minister knew about this.
Yeah, before we've even had this report being compiled by Adam Tolley KC that's expected to have a fair way to run, we are getting a slew of stories, really, about how much was known by the Prime Minister and how much was known sort of in Whitehall at the centre of government before Dominic Raab got reappointed to the post of Justice Secretary and appointed Deputy Prime Minister as well. What the Times newspaper is saying this morning is not precisely that Rishi Sunak knew, but that the Cabinet Secretary, the most senior civil servant in the government, Simon Case, was informed of a written complaint months before Rishi Sunak reappointed Dominic Raab. Now, you would expect the Cabinet Secretary to be heavily involved in some of the proprietary and process that goes around some Cabinet reappointments if there is kind of doubt over the propriety of it and any doubts about the person's behaviour. Now, the Cabinet Office, where Simon Case works, that he's the head of, essentially, has not commented on this. Number 10 have said that the Justice Secretary's appointment went through the usual process and have repeated the very specific form of words to all allegations of what Rishi Sunak knew, that he wasn't aware of any formal complaints. Now, of course, that's crucial because earlier this week, our political editor, Beth Rigby, reported a source telling her that the Prime Minister was told, albeit informally, or warned about some aspects of Dominic Raab's behaviour before being reappointed to Justice Secretary. So I think what we're starting to see really is some of the sort of spin-off stories land at Rishi Sunak's door before even the formal investigation is completed. Of course, Dominic Raab denies accusations of bullying. He said he's confident of being cleared in this. I think for the Prime Minister, he'll want to get this report out and this matter settled as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and still no clue about when it is coming out, is there? No. OK, for the moment, thanks very much indeed, Rob. Now, a new scheme which offers households discounts for using less electricity at peak periods will help avoid blackouts. Could be a blueprint for how we'll all have to get by in the future. That's according to the National Grid, which has already activated the scheme twice this year. With temperatures falling again and the energy crisis biting, can the UK keep the lights on this winter? Our climate change correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter reports.
This will soon be the site of a huge onshore wind farm in the Shetland Islands.
Well, Shetland is statistically the windiest place in the UK.
Aaron Priest is building it. The shift to renewables, a chance to leave the legacy of oil and gas behind.
It is the future for Shetland and it will provide great opportunities for future generations here.
But nothing in the world of energy is perfect. And at a neighbouring site already up and running, we climb a turbine to get a different view of what is to come.
Earlier this year, UK wind power set records, generating over half of the UK's electricity. But the problem is, when the wind stops, these turbines stop producing electricity. And because we can't store renewable energy at the scale necessary yet, something else has to fill the gap.
This winter, on very cold, very still days, that involves people like Wendy Hall volunteering to reduce her electricity consumption to help avoid blackouts.
Everything that I can switch off without it causing a problem to reset it, then I will do.
It's called the Demand Flexibility Service, a new national grid scheme that pays people to use less at peak times.
I'm not worried about the money, it's not about that. If just switching the power off for 1 hour is a help to other people, then I'm happy to do it.
That's England and Wales just down at the bottom here.
The scheme has already helped the National Grid Control Room balance the system. But as we build more intermittent renewables and electrify our homes and vehicles, it's also the way of the future.
And flexibility is going to be a really important component of our energy supply mix going forward, and it will grow and grow as something that we all get used to. We're going to be using energy very differently to how we use it today.
As the UK contemplates the future and the government pushes to decarbonise power, old coal-fired units are still standing by to boost supply if needed. Relics of the Industrial Revolution, a reminder of an era that is almost over. The way we keep the lights on, shifting amid a changing world. Hannah Thomas-Peter, Sky News.
Let's get more now on the warning from Cancer Research UK that cancer diagnoses will increase by a third over the next 2 decades, with the number of new cases exceeding 500,000 a year by 2040. Well, I'm joined now by NHS England's Clinical Director for Cancer, Professor Peter Johnson. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. I'll come to that warning on the number of diagnoses in a moment, but in the meantime, it's World Cancer Day tomorrow. First of all, I was interested to get your analysis of how the NHS is faring as far as cancer diagnosis and treatment goes as we mark that day.
Thanks very much, Hannah, and very good to be with you. The NHS is working phenomenally hard to make sure that we see and treat people who might have cancer as quickly as possible. And we've been seeing record numbers of people referred in for investigation, 2.8 million over the last year alone. And also we're treating record numbers of people, 320,000 started treatment for cancer in the last year. So we are very busy. There's lots going on. The NHS, as everybody knows, is working extremely hard because of all the other things that go on during winter. But generally speaking, I think we are making progress. We're seeing more people than ever before. And most importantly, we're catching cancer at an earlier stage than ever before. And that's thanks to a huge amount of work across the system, and particularly raising people's awareness of the risks of cancer, which is, of course, what World Cancer Day is all about.
Well, you say that the NHS is giving treatment to the highest number of people on record, but there are more and more cases being diagnosed with an ageing population, aren't there? And that's only going to get worse, isn't it? As we said in our introduction, Cancer Research is saying that the number of people in the UK diagnosed with cancer will rise by a third by 2040 in the UK. So can the NHS cope with that level of increase?
Yes, this is very much a feature of the fact that we're all living longer, and that cancer is mainly a disease of older people. So we are expecting the numbers to go up. There are, of course, things we can all do to try and reduce our own risk: stopping smoking, avoiding alcohol, eating a healthy diet, staying active. All of those things to try and reduce the numbers of people getting cancer will help us. But nonetheless, there is still the fact that we are all getting older, and the NHS needs to make sure that we've got the capacity, we've got the resources to respond to that challenge and to make sure that people can get the tests and the treatments that they need.
Do you have the ability and the resources now to meet demand? I mean, a record number of people in England are waiting longer than ever for cancer treatment, aren't they? How concerned are you about that?
Yeah, there's no doubt that there are huge pressures all the way across the system, from colleagues in GP surgeries through into hospitals. And we are investing very heavily into things like the diagnostic equipment we need, the scanners, the endoscopy tests and so forth. We're playing catch up because we're coming out of COVID, which has put a huge strain on the system, and we're trying to get these things up and running as quickly as we can. But there's no doubt that there are pressures, and people are waiting longer than we would want them to wait because of that. But that isn't a reason to avoid coming forward if you've got worrying symptoms or there's something that isn't quite right. We'd much rather see people have them there, know that we need to get the tests done, than to not have people coming forward because they're in some way worried about how the NHS can cope.
Well, yes, and tell us a little bit about cancer survival rates, because they do lag behind that of some comparable countries, don't they? What's the NHS doing to improve that?
Yeah, cancer survival rates have been rising steadily, and they've gone up just about 10% over the last decade. So we are doing well, but we could always do better. And there is no doubt that catching cancer at the earliest possible stage is the absolute key to this. And that's what we're very focused on, making sure that people know what's right, what's not right for them, so that they come and see their GP, and trying to lower the barriers to people getting the tests, trying to reduce the time it takes to get those tests, and trying to bring in the most innovative treatments and the best ways of looking after people. All of that needs a huge amount of work. All of that requires a huge amount of investment, which is what we are doing. But there's no doubt at all that we can do more all the time, and more resources and more focus on cancer are always welcome.
And you say it's important to try and highlight early diagnosis, but does it concern you then that people are having problems getting GP appointments?
I think it's really important to recognise how hard our colleagues in primary care are working. They are referring people in record numbers. We're seeing the highest numbers of people referred in by GPs as ever before. So it's not that they're not seeing and referring people, they absolutely are, and people are coming through. So if you have got something that's not right, it's really important to go and see your GP surgery. They are there to help. They are referring people through. So although I know that there are some pressures, and I know that it's sometimes difficult to get an appointment straight away, nonetheless, really important that people persist and that people come forward.
Well, Professor Peter Johnson, we really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much for talking to us here on Sky News.
Thank you.
Let's take a quick check on the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the mild theme will continue with further rain in the north, but Sunday does look colder and drier overall. It's a mild start with low cloud in the north giving outbreaks of rain. Northern Ireland will turn drier and brighter through the morning, whereas the rest of northern Britain will cloud over with some patchy rain extending eastwards. Meanwhile, Ireland and southern Britain look mainly dry.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, with parts of the world experiencing extreme weather conditions, let's take a look at the impact of climate change on the planet and look at our little data dashboard here. Well, it's quite a big data dashboard, actually. And just to explain it to you, the right-hand side of the screen shows how the UK's power is currently being produced. So 14% from gas, for example, there. And then top left, you can see just how much warmer the Earth is now than the time of the Industrial Revolution, around 1880. That's when modern record-keeping began. And then finally, here, bottom left, you can see the total amount of CO2 emissions in millions of tonnes. And as you can see, that's ticking up all the time there. Now, Beyoncé fans hoping to buy tickets for her UK concerts crashed a website with huge demand for the singer's first new tour in 7 years. Bet she puts on a good concert. Customers reported issues during the purchasing process after pre-sale tickets went live for O2 customers only. But all is not lost, as fans will have access to other pre-sale events today, followed by a general sale on Tuesday, the 7th of February. Now, do stay with us here on Sky News Breakfast as a new report uncovers terrible conditions at a women's prison in Gloucestershire. I'll be speaking to the Chief Inspector of Prisons about what improvements are needed. Hello, welcome back. Now, conditions at a prison holding women with mental health problems have been described as appalling by a watchdog. Some cells at Eastwood Park in Gloucestershire were found smeared with scratches and bloodstains. The Chief Inspector of Prisons said an experienced member of his staff said they were the worst he'd ever seen. And Charlie Taylor joins me now. Welcome to you. Thanks so much for coming in to talk to us about this. Tell us a little bit more about your findings at this prison.
Well, Eastwood Park holds about 350 women in Gloucestershire, and this is one of the most concerning inspections that I've done. We very rarely give out our lowest score for safety for women's prisons, which tend to be safer places. But in this case, we were really concerned, particularly on one house block, where the conditions that women were being held in were appalling. They were in dark, dingy cells. There was scratch marks on the walls. They hadn't been cleaned properly. There was graffiti everywhere. And the women in there were in extreme mental distress. So these were women who were very unwell. Some of them were self-harming in the most extreme ways. And we were very concerned that the prison simply wasn't doing enough to look after those women.
Let me just show you, which you will have seen, of course, show our viewers, the Ministry of Justice response to this. A spokesperson has said, I think we can show it in our screen, this is a deeply concerning report and we are already addressing the serious issues it raises, including appointing more staff and creating a new task force to improve women's safety at the prison. Given what you've seen, are you reassured at all by the response from the Ministry of Justice?
Well, one of the challenges that they faced at Eastwood Park is they didn't have enough staff. So it's good if more staff are going in there, that's excellent. But the other thing that we felt very strongly was the level of training for staff. These were some very young staff members. We're dealing with some women in acute distress, and they simply didn't have the skill set. They weren't being looked after in a way that was going to mean they could give these women what they needed. And quite honestly, some of the women we saw there shouldn't have been in prison at all. They should have been in hospital, whether that was a secure hospital or a community hospital, but they simply wasn't appropriate to hold those women in prison.
How common are conditions like this for women's prisons?
Generally, what we find in women's prisons is conditions are usually better. So this is very unusual to find things as bad as they were at Eastwood Park. However, we very often find women who ought to be in hospital being locked up in prison, and that's a big concern for us.
So how would you describe the levels of stress that women in that prison were experiencing?
Well, on that particular wing, these were people who were very unwell anyway, but they were very unwell people who were being kept in conditions that simply were not going to make them better and were going to exacerbate the problems that were already there.
And you talk about not enough staff and not enough training as well. I mean, how much of an issue is that more broadly in recruitment, but also the right kind of training?
Well, that's right. I mean, recruitment has been a problem, retention has been a problem within the prison service. But also what really worried me in Eastwood Park is there were some very young, very dedicated, very impressive staff, but they simply didn't have the capabilities to deal with the women who were in their care. They didn't have the healthcare training, they weren't getting the mental health support, and therefore they were being put in an impossible situation. I was worried about the staff's mental health as well as the mental health of the prisoners.
So what would you like to see happen now?
Well, we'd like to see some improvements to that house block very quickly. We'd like to see a focus on training of staff so that they understand and are able to deal with people with those difficulties. But most important of all, we'd like to see enough beds in hospitals and an end to some of the bureaucratic processes that stop people who should be in hospital from languishing in prison.
Do you feel that some steps are being taken? I read here that a dedicated safety task force group is being established, that some maintenance work, for example, the surroundings are being improved, as well as additional staff, as we mentioned, being taken on, newly designed care plans, that there seems to be some steps in place.
Well, look, that's all good news. We'll wait and see till we go back to the prison whether that's had the effect that we would like it to have.
OK, so you think that in itself may not be enough?
Well, let's wait and see what happens when we go back to the jail. It's good that something's being done, but we want to see the impact on the women who are in the jail and on the staff who are there.
And how soon do you go back? How often do you carry out inspections?
We'll be back at Eastwood Park within the next year.
Within the next year?
Yes.
So at what stage is that likely to happen?
At some stage in the next year, so probably sometime towards the end of the summer into the autumn.
OK, so you'd like to see improvements by then. Well, Charlie Taylor, thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks
Thank you.
for coming in to talk to us about it. Affected by the scandal. So, gentlemen, thanks both so much for coming in to tell us about your experiences. And, Richard, I want to hear about your story in a moment. But first, Des, to you first of all, as a kind of overview, today will be the end of a series of hearings over a number of years into the infected blood scandal. What do you make of the proceedings and what you've heard?
It's been 4 years. It's 4 years of evidence. It's 4 years of hearing people give evidence and reading papers behind the evidence which they've given. It's been a very, very painful time for the victims because every time they give evidence or every time they hear the story again and again and again, they have to relive it. So it's been very important for the victims. Insofar as what the inquiry will uncover, we don't know yet because, of course, the report is unlikely to appear before us until sometime later this year, we're told. But doing the best we can, we do believe that it has been beneficial. It's been a process of catharsis, if you like, so that people can begin to understand why whatever happened did happen. One of the disappointing things about it, I have to say, is that the Department of Health began this inquiry and very, very openly saying, we are sorry. That was over 4 years ago. When asked about 10 days ago, could they tell us what they were sorry about? They didn't. They couldn't. They refused. And we had hoped that this inquiry would uncover the truth and there would be an openness about what happened, an openness about what happened, why it happened, and why it should not have happened. And all we get at the moment, in the closing days of the inquiry, is the Department of Health, a Secretary of State for Health, refusing to give proper instructions to his lawyers so those lawyers can appear before the inquiry and say what they apologise for. Now, that is serious.
And once the report is published, what do you want from the government?
What we want from the government is a full and detailed apology, not a meaningless paragraph in a document which appears before the inquiry. We want someone from the Department of Health and the government, but it is part of the government, to say what they did, and accept that what they did was wrong and that they will do their utmost to make sure that this never happens again. Now, as long as they are in denial, and they're still in denial, believe you me, that will not happen, and it's important that it does.
OK, and Richard, I want to hear your story. Tell us what happened to you.
OK, well, I'm a severe haemophiliac and was infected with 2 forms of hepatitis and HIV as a child.
And how did that infection happen?
Through treatment, factor VIII treatment that was given to me by the NHS.
And how's that affected your life?
In every way possible. It's prevented us from having children, being able to hold down meaningful employment. The amount of stigma, the level of stigma that goes along with it's been dreadful.
So explain that to me. Why is there stigma around?
Well, I think there always has been and there always will be. I mean, people, I think, are naturally frightened of being around people that are known to have these viruses. And I think it's just a natural thing, but it is still about today as prevalent as it was, I believe, in the 1980s. I believe that the fear is tangible, it's still there. And we actually moved to, when we first got married, we actually moved to an area of the country which was essentially rural so that we could be away from the public. And it's still something that plays on our minds, I think, every day.
So a huge impact on your life?
Huge impact on our lives, and it's ongoing. I've been campaigning for 30+ years, the culmination of which has been this public inquiry, which has been 4.5 years of it. But I don't know what and I think this applies to many, many other people that have been rigorously campaigning as well, I don't really know what we're going to do after this inquiry finishes. We're going to be left with this void because we have put so much into it. We've dedicated our lives to campaigning for infected and affected people, and we've lost so many along the way.
And what will make it worth it, that campaigning and that drive for this inquiry? What kind of result do you feel you need to see?
First and foremost, I think we need a wholesome and full, meaningful apology from government, not something that's whispered over the dispatch box. I don't think there can ever be closure. The only way in which government can recompense is perhaps the best word, victims and their families, is financially. That's the only way they can possibly do it. They can never give us back our health. There isn't a magic bullet that will reverse the hepatitis C and HIV infections. I don't think there'll ever be closure, but it's so late in the day. This inquiry should have happened 30 years ago, and people are old, people are tired. And I just hope to God that the government gets their finger out and acts swiftly, and lets people get on with the lives that they have left, because time is running out.
You gave evidence yourself, didn't you, at one of the hearings. How was that?
I wasn't going to do it at the beginning. I was going to be anonymous. But at the very last minute, I said to my wife, let's do this, we can do this. And it was, to be honest, it was the most cathartic thing that I think I've ever done, because I've lived with this shadow over my head for years and years and years, and tried to keep everything under my hat. And the same went for both of us. Didn't talk about it much. But as soon as that hearing had finished, as soon as I gave my oral evidence, it felt like this huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Suddenly, I felt free. We both felt free. We've heard some tragic stories at the inquiry. But it's been a remarkable inquiry. I don't think we could have wished for more. Yeah.
And Des, when you hear stories like Richard's, to be talking about financial compensation feels fairly paltry, doesn't it, really?
It
and
does,
yet
it does.
the government has stepped up. There is money promised, isn't there? The government's agreed to pay thousands of eligible victims a £100,000 interim payment.
Yeah.
Are you satisfied with the levels of compensation for your clients?
The present levels of compensation, or what they will be, are unknown. The £1,000 interim payment, we've never been told what it's interim to. So normally someone says, well, this is what you get now, you're getting something else later. The government has been totally silent about what it's interim to, so what's going to happen in the future. The interim payments have only been made to a very, very narrow group of people. A huge number have received nothing. And be forgiven for thinking basically that was the government trying to get off the hook last August, September, October. There was a recommendation from the inquiry that those payments be made. It did comply with that recommendation, but since then it's been struggling at the end of a hook, trying to get off, and so far successfully. We're hopeful that that will not carry on and that the compensation will be paid at some point in the very, very near future.
OK, well, we're out of time now, but perhaps you'll come back when the report comes out. But Des Collins and Richard Warwick, thank you both very much indeed for coming in and for sharing your story.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, in the last few minutes, China's Foreign Affairs Ministry has responded to the United States, which says that it's tracking a suspected Chinese surveillance balloon over its airspace. And speaking earlier this hour, China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Mao Ning, has said they're trying to establish the facts.
China is a responsible country and we act in accordance with international law. We have no intention to violate other countries' sovereignty and airspace. And as I said, we are gathering and verifying the facts. We hope relevant parties would handle the matter in a cool-headed way.
And, of course, we'll bring you all the latest on that throughout the morning. Time now, though, for a look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the mild theme will continue with further rain in the north, but Sunday looks colder and drier overall. It's a mild start with low cloud in the north giving outbreaks of rain. Northern Ireland will turn drier and brighter through the morning, whereas the rest of northern Britain will cloud over with patchy rain extending eastwards.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now then, after years of wrangling, what's known as the Stonehenge of the North will today be handed over to the nation. It consists of a series of massive earthworks at Thornborough in North Yorkshire, known as henges, believed to be up to 5,000 years old. And they've been threatened by quarrying, but now they're being handed over to Historic England and English Heritage, who describe them as the most important Neolithic monuments in the north of England.